question that's often asked is, how do I fund an acquisition? Let's say you've agreed a purchase, you've agreed a price, you know how the deal's going to work, but you've got to look at funding. And really there are a few different ways of funding a transaction. The simplest way in many respects is you have the money up front. Now, you may be in a fortunate position where you have that and you're well capitalized, that's fantastic. That's a simple arrangement in terms of understanding the affordability of that transaction, but that's relatively unusual in our experience. Generally speaking, there's a level of debt needed to support a transaction. So that's the second approach, which is looking at external debt. Now, we have relationships with all of the high street banks and with a number of secondary lenders. We're considered A-grade borrowers for good reason. We're well established. We've been in existence for 30 years. The lenders and the banks know the model. They understand it works. They understand that the attrition rate is tiny. Therefore, they like lending to us and our franchisees because we pay money back. So that's probably the most common approach, looking at external funding. There is a third way, which is often missed, which is effectively the vendor funding a transaction, at least partly funding a transaction. And that's done through deferred consideration. And I always talk about this when I'm talking to aspirational funders, because in reality, in a lot of deals, there is some level of deferred payment because the vendors accept that's needed. And if there's deferred payment, you have an opportunity to fund some of that deferred element through the profits the business will generate after you've acquired. One to be careful with and needs some careful cash flow modeling, but the purchase price does not always translate to the amount of debt you need to take on board, because you have the ability to at least service some of it through ongoing cash flow. Part of our role and the team's role is to sit down with acquirers and look at business planning, look at cash flows and understand what options do they have, how can they service debt, and how can the business help them to reduce that debt burden from day one.